Alyssa had always been a practical person. Raised in a family of farmers, she was used to dealing with reality head-on, without being swayed by superstitions or irrational fears. When she and her husband bought a small farm on the outskirts of a rural town, she saw it as an opportunity to live closer to nature, far from the chaos of urban life. The farm was surrounded by green fields and had an old red barn that needed some repairs, but Alyssa was excited by the challenge. However, something about the place stirred an unease in her that she couldn't quite explain. The first few months on the farm were busy with work. Alyssa and her husband, Jack, spent their days clearing the land, renovating the house, and getting things in order. Their two dogs, Max and Ruby, loved the open space to run and explore. But over time, Alyssa began to notice strange behavior in Max, the older of the two. He was a large and strong German shepherd, usually confident and protective, but recently he seemed to be constantly on alert, as if he were waiting for something to happen. One night, Jack was away on a business trip, and Alyssa was preparing for a quiet evening at home. She fed the dogs, locked the doors, and settled on the couch with a book. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the wooden walls settling in the night's cold. Max was lying beside her, but instead of relaxing as usual, he was restless. Ears perked and eyes fixed on the back door. Ruby, the younger Labrador, didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but Max's behavior made Alyssa start to feel uneasy. That's when she heard it. At first, it was just a muffled sound, an indistinct noise she couldn't quite identify. But Max immediately stood up, the fur on his back bristling, growling low. A chill ran down Alyssa's spine, but she tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was just an animal outside or the wind blowing something loose. However, the sound came again, louder this time, coming from the direction of the old barn. It was a sound she couldn't place, something between a moan and a rustling, like something was moving out there. Max ran to the back door and began barking furiously, as if trying to ward off an intruder. Alyssa hesitated for a moment but grabbed a flashlight and decided to check out what was going on. She knew she wouldn't be able to sleep until she took a look. With Max by her side, growling and in a defensive stance, she opened the door and stepped into the yard. The air was cold and damp, and the sky was covered with clouds, without a single star in sight. Alyssa directed the flashlight's beam toward the barn, where the sound seemed to have originated. As they approached the barn, Max suddenly stopped, refusing to go any further. He was visibly agitated, which was completely out of character for him. Alyssa felt her heart race, but she continued alone, trying to convince herself there was nothing to fear. She pulled open the heavy barn door and stepped inside, shining the flashlight around. The barn was dark and silent, with shadows of old farming equipment cast on the walls. The smell of hay and aged wood was intense, but there was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Alyssa walked cautiously through the barn, hearing only the sound of her own footsteps. Each creak of the wooden floor seemed to echo in the vast, silent space, but suddenly she felt a presence, as if she were being watched. The feeling was so intense that she quickly turned around, expecting to see someone or something there. But there was nothing, just the dark emptiness and shadows that seemed to move as the flashlight beam wavered. She heard the sound again, a soft rustling, like something was dragging across the barn floor. The flashlight trembled in her hand as she tried to locate the source of the noise. When she finally did, Alyssa froze in fear. In the darkest corner of the barn was an indistinct shadow, something that didn't seem to have form or substance, but was clearly moving. She tried to rationalize what she was seeing, perhaps just a trick of light and shadow, but something inside her knew it wasn't that simple. The shadow seemed to grow, as if it were approaching, and Alyssa felt a wave of panic wash over her. Without thinking twice, she turned and ran out of the barn, with Max now at her side, barking furiously. They ran back to the house, where Alyssa slammed the door behind them and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. Max continued to growl at the door, as if he knew the danger was still out there. Alyssa spent the rest of the night awake, with the lights on, and Max standing guard beside her. She knew something strange was happening on that farm, something she couldn't explain. The next morning, when Jack returned home, she told him what had happened. Jack tried to reassure her, saying it was probably just a wild animal that had taken refuge in the barn. but Alyssa knew it wasn't that simple. In the days that followed, Alyssa avoided the barn, feeling a growing aversion to it. Max also refused to go near the place, which was unusual for a dog who used to explore every corner of the farm without fear. Alyssa began noticing other strange things happening around the house. Doors that closed on their own, inexplicable noises at night, and a constant feeling of being watched. She knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't figure out what it was. It was only when she spoke with an older neighbor, a woman named Evelyn, that Alyssa began to understand what might be happening. Evelyn told her old stories about the farm, tales of tragedies and mysteries that dated back decades. According to her, the barn had been the site of a terrible accident involving the previous owner, a man who had died tragically inside. Evelyn believed his spirit still haunted the place, trapped between this world and the next. Alyssa wasn't sure if she believed in ghosts, but she couldn't deny the strange things she was experiencing. She decided to take action and invited a local priest to bless the house and barn, hoping it would calm things down. The priest performed the blessing, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers, and for a while things seemed to return to normal. Max, though still cautious, began to venture closer to the barn, and the nightly noises subsided. But the peace was temporary. A few weeks later, Alyssa woke up in the middle of the night to Max barking furiously at the back door. She rushed into the living room, where she found the door ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. Fear gripped her again, and when she looked out the window toward the barn, she saw something that nearly stopped her heart. A faint yellowish light shining through the gaps in the barn's wooden walls. It was as if someone or something was inside, waiting. Alyssa knew she had to do something, but she was terrified at the thought of facing whatever was in the barn. However, she also knew she couldn't continue living in fear. She grabbed a gun Jack kept for emergencies, turned on all the lights in the house and called him, asking him to come home as quickly as possible. While waiting, she sat in the living room with Max by her side, both keeping an eye on the door. When Jack finally arrived, they decided to confront the barn together. With the truck's headlights illuminating the way, they walked to the barn, with Max now calmer beside them. Jack opened the door slowly, and they stepped inside. The light Alyssa had seen earlier was gone, and everything was quiet. They searched everywhere but found nothing that could explain what Alyssa had seen. After that night, things on the farm began to change. Max seemed more relaxed, and the nighttime noises ceased. The barn, though still avoided by Alyssa, no longer felt as threatening. She never discovered what really happened that night, but the experience left an indelible mark on her. Alyssa learned to live with the mystery, accepting that not everything can be explained. In time, Alyssa and Jack decided to sell the farm and move to a place closer to town. They never told the new owners about the strange events they had experienced, preferring to leave the past behind. Max, Alyssa's loyal companion, remained by her side, protecting her to the end. And though Alyssa tried to forget, the nights when the barn seemed alive and the fear she felt never completely faded from her memory.